Welcome to this Gŵyl Crime Cymru Festival event, and welcome to Aberystwyth. Croeso i'r digwyddiad Gŵyl Crime Cymru Festival hwn, a chroeso I Aberystwyth. Aberystwyth, the cultural capital of Wales, home to Aberystwyth University and the National Library of Wales, once home to Welsh princes. The Bearits of Wales is the jewel in the crown of Cardigan Bay's stunning coastline and home to hugely successful TV drama Hinterland. And now, the streets that have become familiar to fictional D.I. Mathias's many fans are getting ready to welcome celebrities from the worlds of crime fiction and crime drama. Because Aberystwyth is home to Wales's first ever international crime fiction event, Gŵyl Crime Cymru Festival. During the early May bank holiday weekend of 2022, Aber, as the town is affectionately known, will play host to a multitude of events that will offer something for every fan of crime fiction and drama. Internationally successful authors will entertain and meet readers in historic buildings. Pub quizzes will bring together authors and readers. Writing workshops, meet the agent sessions, and informal readings will help encourage and develop new writing talent. And in sparkling celebration of new Welsh talent, a champagne reception for Crime Cymru's first crime novel competition winners. This will be an Aber bank holiday weekend like no other. So, come for the crime fiction and take Cymru home in your hearts. Rydym yn edrych ymlaen yn fawr iawn at eich croesawu I Aberystwyth ac I Geredigion.
Good evening. On behalf of Crime Cymru and our festival partners, Aberystwyth Town Council, welcome to the 15th event of Gŵyl Crime Cymru Festival Online. I'm Amy Willams and I am delighted to welcome you to this event. As you've just heard, we feature an independent Welsh bookshop at each panel. The bookshop for this event tonight is Bookish in Crickhowell. So, if you're inspired to read any of the books you hear about this evening, and I'm sure you will be, please do consider buying from them. At the end of the session, for your convenience, if you go to the programme page on our website and click through to the link, you'll be able to get your books from there. Now this evening, I'm joined by two incredible authors. With more than 2 million copies of her books sold worldwide, #1 bestseller Clare Mackintosh is the multi-award-winning author of I Let You Go, which was a Sunday Times bestseller and the fastest-selling title by a new crime writer in 2015. It also won the Theakston's Old Peculiar Crime Novel of the Year in 2016. Both Clare's second and third novels, I See You and Let Me Lie, were #1 bestsellers with the Times. All three of her books were selected for the Richard and Judy Book Club, and Clare's latest novel, After the End, was published in June 2019 and spent 7 weeks in the Sunday Times hardback bestseller chart. Clare's latest thriller, Hostage, which is wonderful by the way, I've managed to get my hands on an early copy, will be published in June this year. Hi Clare.
Hello, hi, what a lovely welcome. Diolch yn fawr am y croeso.
Oh, croeso fawr, croeso fawr. How are you doing tonight?
Very well, thank you. Really excited to be here.
Fantastic. Next up, we have Beverly Jones. She's a former journalist and a police press officer, and now a novelist and general book obsessive. Bev was born in a small village in the South Wales Valleys, north of Cardiff. She started her journalism career with Trinity Minor Mirror newspaper, writing stories for the Rhondda Leader and the Western Mail before becoming a broadcast journalist with the BBC Wales Today TV News based in Cardiff. She has worked on all aspects of crime reporting, as well as community news and features, producing stories and content for newspapers and live TV. Most recently, Bev worked as a press officer for South Wales Police, dealing with the media and participating in criminal investigations, security operations, and emergency planning. Perhaps unsurprisingly, she channels these experiences of true crime and her insight into the murkier side of human nature into her dark psychological thrillers set in and around South Wales. Her novels Where She Went, Halfway and Wilderness are published by Little Brown under the name B.E. Jones. Welcome, Bev.
Hello.
There she is.
It works. I'm here.
Thank you so much to both of you for chatting with me tonight. I am so excited. I'm on absolute tenterhooks. I've read both of your books and I'm thrilled to be chatting with you. So thank you very much. So I think we'll start off for those that maybe haven't read your books with a little elevator pitch. So if you could, in about a minute, tell me what your upcoming releases are. Should we start with you, Bev?
Okay, well, my latest novel, The Beach House, is set partly in the Pacific Northwest in Oregon and also partly in South Wales. So we've got a dual location for this one. So it's out in June, but as a little taste, imagine you come home one day from the shops, open your back door in your perfect beach house, and you find someone has left you some alarming little gifts, namely a length of rope, a knife, and a set of handcuffs on your kitchen counter. This is what happens to Grace when she comes home one day. She calls the police immediately. Chaos starts in the small town that she lives in because people assume it must be a home invasion or some kind of, pervert has broken in. But linked to her childhood in South Wales and the past that she's left behind and escaping. So we have a dual story based in two different places, and it's out in June. So you'll have to read it to find out if Grace is the hero or the villain of the piece.
Fantastic, thank you, Bev. And Claire?
So Hostage, out in June. It is a contemporary take on the classic locked room thriller. So it's a kind of Murder on the Orient Express meets Con Air. It's set on the first ever non-stop flight from London to Sydney. It's a 20-hour flight. And very early in the flight, a flight attendant, Mina, receives an anonymous threat from one of the passengers on the plane, and she has to choose. Does she prioritize the lives of all those people on that plane or the lives of her family waiting at home? So what does she do? What would you do?
So I've been lucky enough to get an early copy, and I have to tell you, it kept me up all night. It kept me up all night. I'm already a terrible flyer. I dread to think what's going to happen when I try to go on my next holiday. It was absolutely fantastic. I loved it.
Thanks.
So I'd like to talk a little bit about location. Now, the location of both of your books is very different. What was it that inspired those locations? Is it somewhere that you've been in real life and thought, well, that was, a perfect setting for a book? Should we start with you, Bev?
Yeah, well, I think location has always been, I get inspired by places that I've been and visited. So my first few novels, I set them largely in Wales, in and around Wales, because that was what I was familiar with. But the more recent two, I went on a road trip to the US a couple of years ago with my husband. And I traveled through all these sort of amazing scenery of the Midwest, through Monument Valley, the Grand Canyon, out into Yosemite and the sort of high Sierras. And I was really struck by that kind of sense of wilderness. You can see where the title came from. And the idea that when you're away from the of the city and the things that seem normal and orderly and civilized can suddenly start to perhaps fall away from you, and what one person does can suddenly seem like it doesn't matter quite so much, which is where the inspiration for the story of Olivia and her husband, who were on a dream holiday. And I must stress, because I know people have been slightly concerned, that my husband did make it back from the holiday safe and well, and he is here in person. But it was based on the idea of an unhappy couple on a road trip, and the possibilities that might be presented by the locations that she's in. As she points out, it's dangerous out there. There are great heights to fall from. There are things that want to bite you, eat you. You have to carry your own water with you. It presents you with opportunities you might not think of at home if you suddenly discover that your husband has been having an affair. So that kind of idea where the character's motivation meets location has always, I think that has always interested me, because I think we're all different away from home. We all, you have the traditional holiday romance if you're away because you feel more energetic, or, romantic, and you feel more adventurous. But if you're in a bad place and you're not a very nice person, this, the location can bring out those opportunities in you. And it's the same with this, with my new one, the beach house, which is also set in the Pacific Northwest, a bit further north. So it's that idea of that kind of wild landscape that can awaken something in someone. And I'm a sucker for a really good location. So definitely a huge influence.
I think, interestingly enough, wilderness is obviously set in these grand kind of open spaces, but I actually felt claustrophobic reading it, which is fantastic, which is exactly what you want when you read, a crime thriller type of novel. It was brilliant. I loved it. And what about you, Claire? What inspired the?
Well, so every book is different for me, and every process is different. And in terms of location, sometimes it's the location that drives the story, and other times it's the other way around. And the story comes first, and the location, it's a book that is universal and could be anywhere. So with Hostage, unsurprisingly, it was the location that drove the story. That sort of the pressure cabin, literally a pressurized cabin, of being in on a long haul flight, unable to go anywhere, unable to escape, was really intriguing. Other times the story has come first. So with I Let You Go, which is set in Wales, and it seems fitting to talk about that, given that we are virtually, at least, in Wales. It was never meant to be set in Wales. So the first draft of I Let You Go was set in Cornwall, or rather that I started writing it in Cornwall. And so I Let You Go is about a woman who is trying to start over after a terrible tragedy that's taken the life of a young child. And initially she went to Cornwall, and there's without any spoilers, there's a particular scene in the book, a plot point where a person has to get from A to B in a particular amount of time in order to get there before someone else. And if you've ever driven down to Cornwall, you'll know that it just takes bloody ages. And actually, logistically, I couldn't make that work. And so I was in a bit of a quandary, because I'd already written the atmospheric scenes of this caravan park, which was at the top of a cliff, and I'd described this sort of encircling of cliffs, and I thought, this is really annoying. And so I went onto Google Earth, and I thought, right, well, I basically need somewhere that is, no more than a couple of hours away from Bristol. It's going to have to be Wales. And I looked at a map, and then I found Three Cliffs Bay, and I was like, well, that is where I've written my book. That's so bizarre. And so I moved everything to Three Cliffs Bay, completely fell in love with the area, and have been back several times since the book came out, because it's such a phenomenal place. So that's how that came about.
Brilliant. And when it comes to planning crime novels, now I'm a reader, you can tell by the shelves behind me, but I'm in no way a writer, and I'm always fascinated by different authors' process when it comes to planning and writing novels. And I suppose there are two distinct groups when it comes to this, and it's, you know, planners and pantsers flying by the seat of your pants, quite literally. Are either of you either or a bit of both, Bev?
Oh, definite pantser. Pantser with a little bit of a plan, I would say. I usually have a scenario in mind, and I know that I want that to be the main sort of scenario. The main reveal usually is the thing I start with. And then very often I have the first line in my head. Maybe it's been knocking around in there for years, but I haven't been able to think about how to thread it into a story. And often the last line. So I kind of start with Wilderness, for example. I had this line in my head that was going round and round. No one died until 6 months after I saw the videotape. The timing was complicated. And I had that line in my head for ages. And then it suddenly, I realized I could tie this to scenarios that I'd sort of been thinking about when I was away. And I had the ending. So I thread it together as I go along. And what happens in the middle is often develops as I go along, but I trust it to sort of work itself out. Funnily enough, I was watching Lee Child on the Crime Cymru panel the other night, and somebody had asked him a question about how does he know what Reacher's going to do at the end? And he said, well, if I've written it properly and I've written A, B, C, D, there's only one thing that Reacher can do with the end that's true to his character. And I make it difficult for myself, and I start with my A and my end, and then I have to go back and try and make sure that that is true to the ending, so that it's not.
Oh, you've frozen. Are you with us, Bev? Looks like we're having some technical difficulties. We'll come, if you can hear us, we'll come back to you, Bev. Claire, what about you? Do you plan, or do you write as you go?
I'm completely the opposite to Bev. I plan everything in great detail. I always think of it a little bit like being like a building, like the development of a building. And so I will move through different stages. I will start off as the architect, and I need to know the foundations, the premise of the story. I need to know where those structural walls are going to be, and where the pillars are, and because I can't build the walls unless I know what that framework is, and I can't start adding detail. And then at some point, I become the builder, and I'm writing it and creating it. And then once I've done all of that, then I get to be the interior designer and go and do my prose edit and beef up all the language and add all the little sort of detail. But I need to know what those plot points are. I hear quite a lot of authors say that they would find it restrictive, that they'd find it boring if they knew where the story was going. And I can't really relate to that. I can't because there's so much creativity in the process of the writing and the sort of the bringing to life of those plans, that I don't see it as boring at all. I think it's really, really exciting. And as long as you allow yourself some fluidity and scope to change, then you can be just as sort of open to new plot twists and possibilities as if you just sat down with a blank page.
And do you think that comes then from the type of person that you are, both of you? So me, for example, if I ever were to write something, I am a bit of a control freak, and so I think I would make lists and spreadsheets, and I would be very strict in my planning. Are you, do you plan as much in your day-to-day life as you do when you're writing? And Bev, are you as chilled out in real life as you are when you're writing?
I absolutely, that's my character type. I'll plan If I'm gardening, I've got a sort of a vision for how I want the garden to look. And so I'm working towards that. And if I've got a day off, I am very unlikely to go with the flow. I mean, I'm very unlikely to have a day off, to be honest, but very unlikely to go with the flow. I'll plan. For me, that's just how I am, I think.
You're back with us, Bev.
I am. I wasn't sure if I was still here.
Yes, you are.
Yes, I will. I am a bit of a control freak. I know my mum is watching tonight and my sister, and I'm sure they will tell you that, yes, I'm a little bit of a control freak. I think it comes down to all the years I spent as a journalist and sort of working on deadlines, especially when I was working with the BBC on live television, where everything is slotted down to kind of 10, 30 second, 1 minute, 90 seconds live, and you can't let any leeway get in there. So I think I got so used to kind of planning everything that in my own life that way, that I'll be annoyingly early for something. I'll never be late. I don't like to waste time, so I think it's too valuable to waste. So yeah, organised.
And I suppose a bit more about your writing process then. Do you have a writing routine? Is there a certain time of day that works better for you when it comes to writing? Do you have a specific location that you like to write, a writing space? And do you can you write to music, or do you have to have silence? Should we start with you, Claire?
So if you'd asked me this 18 months ago, I would have told you that I get almost all my writing done on planes and trains and in hotel rooms and in airport lounges and in cafes in foreign cities in between events and publicity engagements. And it has been really, really difficult to adapt my working routine. So normally I would be away for maybe a third of my year. In small chunks, a few days here, a week here, maybe 2 weeks or 3 weeks on tour. And when I'm at home, that would be my sort of administrative time. So if I'm in my office, and I'm very lucky to have a really lovely space to work in, that tends to be where I'll do interviews or articles or, all the kind of nuts and bolts of running a business and doing the sort of the boring bit of the job. And I have really struggled. And that's I don't like to use that word because it's not struggling in the true sense of things, but it has been an adjustment. Obviously, a lot of us have had kids at home, which has been an extra challenge for working at home. But just the sort of my office feels very worky, and so I work a full sort of week. I kind of at my desk at 9ish and finish at 6, maybe 7, Monday to Friday ish. Although I've been working weekends since January because I've got a couple of deadlines to hit. And what I've discovered is that actually the writing bit I need to do on a laptop or an iPad, somewhere else in the house or in a car or just anywhere, because if I'm at my desk, it's sort of psychologically I end up doing admin, emails, social media, those sorts of things. So that's a very rambly answer to yes, I have a routine, but it's not a very good one, is the bottom line. And do I listen to music? I do. I listen to instrumental music, normally piano music, or I've written the last 2 books to the soundtrack of Keeping Faith, which I wholeheartedly recommend.
Before I move on to you, Bev, did you watch the finale, Claire?
I haven't watched any of season 3 yet, but I have it all, it's all ready to go, and I'm going to thoroughly enjoy it because I absolutely adore it. Really great series.
You are in for a treat, you really are. And Bev, what about you? What's your kind of writing routine? Do you have a set time of the day? How do you work it around, everything else that you have to do?
Claire. The difficulty being, though, I have a wire fox terrier now called Erin, and she's insane. So when she sleeps, I work. otherwise she's binging around the house. I have to take her out, and then when she sleeps, but I can't work anywhere other than the box room where the writing magic happens. And I sit in here when I can, and I try to get a good run at it. I can't work in increments. I admire people that can do sort of a couple of hours here. I like to get a really good run at it, so I feel I'm immersed in it. But I don't listen to music much anymore. I do listen to music, but I tend to put a soundtrack to the book, which maybe writing, when I was writing the book called Music to Murder Your Husband By, and it's all the same to when I was sort of thinking about killing my characters or not, or saving them as it works out. So yeah, there's a lot of kind of rock on there, and a lot of indie rock and roll on there, and a lot of stuff that I would listen to when I wanted a certain mood. But otherwise, yeah, quiet is nice, I think. And when not barking helps, when she's not barking. My husband is probably entertaining her downstairs now with the tube or something, which is why you can't hear a fox terrier getting excitable as a leaf bowls down the street outside, or she spots a cat outside. So.
Brilliant. Now, both of you, apart from being wonderful authors, have something else in common, and that's your background in the police. And I was wondering, as someone who, in their regular day job spends a lot of time with the police, I'm interested to know how much of your work with the police has inspired your writing. Claire?
So a great deal, but I always think not in the way that perhaps people assume. So I think there's an assumption that police officers or ex-police officers sort of recycle real life crimes, and actually generally I've found that most real life crimes are incredibly dull. There are obviously lots of high profile true crime dramas, but actually 99% of crimes are really boring and either solved very easily or not solved. And 99% of criminals are really thick and not particularly exciting as an antagonist. So actually, no, I don't draw on that hugely. I did. I Let You Go was sort of sparked by something that had happened in real life, but just that it kind of gave me a catalyst. But what I do find is that being a police officer gave me an insight into a huge number of different parts of society that I wouldn't have had access to otherwise. I grew up in a very safe white middle class bubble, and what policing did was give me a genuine insight, not just into the way other people lived, but also into how fine that line is between a good life and a bad life, or a comfortable life and a dangerous life, or an unsafe life, and how easy it is to cross from one world to the other. And I firmly believe that we all have the capacity to commit terrible, terrible crimes. And I'd challenge anyone on that felt they would never commit a murder, because I think anyone, if the right buttons are pushed and they're in the right situation, and their lives are in peril, or someone else's life is, and so that area is really, really interesting and rich territory for a writer, and very much what I explore in my books. So that's my sort of main driver, I suppose, from my police experience.
Fantastic. And Bev?
Yeah, it's interesting to hear Claire say, the way she described police work, because I was a press officer. I wasn't a police officer like her, but I worked quite closely with officers on lots of investigations. I think there's not enough press officers in television crime dramas, because all they do is run in with a press release in their hand, stand at the front, and then run out. Whereas when I was working with South Wales Police, I was quite closely involved with the inspectors, and I'd get briefed with the investigation. I wasn't involved with the forensic evidence, but I'd get told who the suspects were and what the situation was going to be, so I could plan for, the media and the family knew what to expect. But most criminals are not well organised and thoughtful, and they don't plan. It's fairly obvious usually who your suspect is going to be. So I think the things that inspired me from my time working on all of those cases was there's two things. There's that sort of intersection of the mundane and the random that most of us will never encounter in our lives. We're highly unlikely, thankfully, to ever be attacked on a dark street. The reality is that it's more likely to be somebody that that is going to do you some sort of violence. So there's that intersection, I think, of the sort of the domestic, the mundane, and that timing or circumstance that can turn anyone into I hesitate to say a criminal, because I think most people will just try and justify their actions endlessly. I'm sure Clare had to listen to so many people justifying what they did and why, and they think it's fairly reasonable until it all goes wrong. So I think, that aspect of it definitely inspired my characters and the way that they think, in the way that they don't necessarily think of themselves as the bad people, until obviously something tips over, and then they can't deny anymore that something has gone wrong. So definitely inspired, and in some ways Wilderness and all of my books, they've all been inspired by cases that I worked with officers on, but they all had happy endings. That inspiration, and thought, well, if that hadn't happened like that bizarre thing hadn't happened, and it had gone a different way, and I've made the story sort of out of that, because otherwise reality is a little bit tedious sometimes, and you want to read for entertainment, so you don't want to know that it takes 6 months to get some forensics back, or that you want the short version of it. You kind of want Line of Duty, where everyone's walking around shouting at each other and yes, come on, and it's the more interesting side of it that you take away to write about.
That's actually prompted another question for me now that you've mentioned Line of Duty. Have both of you watched Line of Duty?
Yes, I have watched it. I think it's immensely entertaining. So I don't want to I can't watch a lot of police dramas just because I'm married to a police officer as well. So we sit there and we just roll our eyes and point at the screen and go, we can't, because we just kind of can't get around it. But I've enjoyed watching it from a view point of view. I think it's tremendously entertaining, and I am going to watch it tomorrow. There's a big finale tonight, so no spoilers for anyone. Oh, it's not quite time yet, is it? I'm too early. It's another hour and a half to go.
Yeah, not just
on
yet.
Telly tonight.
Not just yet. And what about you, Clay? Because I'm very familiar with I work very closely with the police in my day-to-day job, and even I struggled with the thousands and thousands of acronyms. Were you understanding what was going on?
But I think that's why we love it, isn't it? We love the fact that we don't necessarily understand everything. Like Bev, my husband's ex-job, in fact, he was in armed protection, and so we shout at the TV, and but we love it, absolutely love it. So I'm kind of 2 out of 10 for accuracy, but 10 out of 10 for entertainment. I absolutely adore it.
That's why we read, that's why we consume media. It's for entertainment purposes.
Absolutely. And actually I'm finding that the further away from my police career I am, and the more books I write, the less I care about accuracy, because actually it's the story that comes first. And so I'm writing things now that I know are inaccurate, and I kind of think I don't care is the bottom line. For example, I'm writing a police procedural at the moment set in North Wales, and there's a murder, and so there would be an incident room, and an incident room will have dozens of people in it, so many people. Now, if you replicate that faithfully, what you're doing is diluting the impact of your central characters. I've got 2 lead detectives, like many police procedurals, and you want them doing the work. And it's actually not realistic that those 2 officers would be doing all the interviewing of all the suspects and, finding all the key evidence. What are the rest of the team doing? Just, sweeping up and making tea. So you have to move away from that accuracy, I think, because otherwise you're introducing dozens of characters, all of whom have a very, very small part to play. And I don't think that's good entertainment.
And ultimately, what you're both writing is fiction, and not a non-fiction book. And so I think I completely agree. I think it matters less and less, the accuracy, more so, how it plays a part in the story that you're writing. Let's talk a little bit about characters and the current, shall we say, the state of things right now, as they have been for the last 13 months. And I'm so interested to know how they would be dealing with this pandemic, and what would they be up to. Bev?
Oh, well, they're not, most of them are not dealing with their everyday lives all that well. So I would imagine if you throw in the current sort of hothouse situation of the pandemic, I would probably say just stand well back, because, they're kind of psychological powder kegs in a way. They take things very personally, and they're sort of on a little bit on the edge of that. Are they going to do something they'll regret? Are they not? Anyway, so we've all been stuck at home, haven't we, with our families and other halves, and we've got perhaps that frustration of wanting to get back out there. In the beach house, Grace presents herself as a kind of very perfect mum. She's got a little girl.
Are you with us, Bev? Should we come to you, Claire, and then we'll go back to Bev then when she returns to us?
I think, are you back, Bev?
Oh, am I back? I'm sorry about this. I don't know why it's dropping out tonight. It's not done it all week, but never mind. No, I was just saying she's a perfect mum on the edge, but she's already cutting some sort of corners in her private life just to keep herself on the straight and narrow, passing off sort of shop bought cookies as her own for the bake sale at the school and things like that. So she's going to be, if she was stuck at home on top of everything else she's got going on, it would all be carnage. So stay away from these people.
So I think so Adam and Mina are my central characters. They're a couple in Hostage, and I think they would be having an absolute nightmare. So Adam's a police officer who's got a load of stuff going on in his private life that he's not telling anyone. So he's quite stressed about that anyway. Obviously, the police have had quite a difficult year. So, they're dealing with all the COVID legislation, protests, vigils, all sorts of stuff happening there. Mina is a flight attendant who I guess would have been grounded. So she's probably been furloughed for the last 14 months and is having to be a full-time mum to Sophia, who's 5 and adopted and has big additional needs and issues. So much as she loves her, I think that's 24/7 with Sophia is quite challenging, and they're recently separated, and I suspect that what would have happened is they would have been forced to have stayed together in the house. I think, to be honest, I think Mina would rather be on the plane in a hostage situation than stuck in a stay-at-home pandemic situation. So I've just ignored the pandemic in Hostage, and indeed in my subsequent book. It's as though it never happened. What have you done, Bev, with the pandemic? Are you writing it in? She's not going to answer me, is she?
No, I don't think she's with us. We'll come back, Bev, we'll come back. So you mentioned initially, Claire, that, that the change in routine, the change in writing routine for you was a bit of a struggle. And I was wondering, because certainly for me at the beginning of the pandemic, I couldn't concentrate on reading. I don't think I read a single book for the first maybe 2 or 3 months of the pandemic because my head was just so full of everything that was going on. Have you read much in the last 12 months?
It's been hard, hasn't it? I normally, in a normal year, I'd read about 100 books a year. And last year I read about 50, 60 books. So it definitely had a big impact. I think I was, my attention span has really been affected, and to the point where I'm having to really work on improving it. So I think I was scrolling through the news a lot. I was responding to breaking news alerts and then going down a big spiral of, looking up that day's death stats. I mean, it was really bad. So yeah, reading's been hard, writing's been hard, all that sort of stuff. But I read, I read the quick reads book. So I went back to, do you know the quick reads scheme? Yeah. So they're short novellas written by best-selling authors specifically for people who are struggling with reading. So sometimes it's adults with dyslexia or English as a second language. And I've got a big stack of them, and I went back to those, and you can read them in an hour, and it's sort of a fairly simple plot line, and that just triggered my reading kind of muscle again, and I'm back now to reading a book or two a week, which is where I like to be. So I've read some great books recently. I'm telling everyone at the moment to buy Erin Kelly's Watch Her Fall, which is phenomenal. Also Eighth Girl, which is really, really brilliant, about a patient with a woman with multiple personality disorders, and you travel through all those personalities with her. It's really great. So yeah, some brilliant books around at the moment.
And you've just answered my next question without needing being prompted. I was going to ask you what's the best thing you've read recently. Now, Bev, before we lost you there, I think we were talking about, how, are you working on anything at the moment? Have you written the pandemic into what you're working on?
No, I haven't. I'll speak quickly in case I drop off again. So, no, it's not in the new one because it was halfway through already when the pandemic hit. So the one coming out in June. And to be honest, my work in progress at the moment, I'm going to set it in 2019 because I just think for the story to work, it can't necessarily have all the restrictions and the social restrictions. How could you write a book set half in America? And how could you do that and not refer to the election and the COVID situation? It would be bizarre. So I think rather than get into the politics of the upheaval of the year that's gone on, I'm going to keep it simple, and as Claire said, kind of keep it to that story. And if I can skip it back in time just a year or so that it's not, because I think readers are a bit, well, why is she not mentioned anything? Why is it not there?
Actually, I think a lot of the authors that we've spoken to during the duration of the festival are doing exactly that, to avoid having to to write about the pandemic and all the restrictions, because it is restrictive when it comes to writing. Have you been reading a lot during the pandemic, Bev?
Well, I was just going to say, in some ways there are stories there that will fit the pandemic beautifully. There'll be those small domestic psychological stories that watching everybody's every move and what's going on, and everyone's all at home, and so I'm sure there are stories that would fit it well, but it's got to be the right story, I think. But I have been reading for escapism, really. I read about one book a week every week, and I've just been trawling the things down just to kind of just that I think everyone wants to get out of their head a bit. This is life falling apart, perhaps, if you're a crime reader, because that's the joy of my life is not as bad as theirs.
Absolutely. And what have you really enjoyed reading recently? What's been on the top of your list?
Well, I have tended to seek out some dark material, so I think enjoyed is a strong word for my last few reads. But I did very much enjoy Catriona Ward's last House on Needless Street, which was it sort of falls between crime and horror, a very kind of disturbing tale that manages to flip itself halfway through. I won't spoiler it for anyone. If you're going to read it, go into it cold. Yeah, and so I've been reading some dark material, really. There's a book called Girl A. I can't remember the author. Isn't that awful?
Abigail
Dean. Which is also a sort of like, oh, that's it, yeah. And that was another sort of very absorbing book, but hard subject material. So I need something light now, I think, something more, yes, something a little bit more enjoyable in the traditional sense.
Have you read Belinda Bauer's Exit?
No, not that one. I've read several Belinda Bauer's. I'm a big fan of hers, but yeah, Exit is on my TBR. So is that a lighter kind of it's because she's very funny as well as having a dark subject matter, isn't she?
Yeah, it's very, very funny. It's about a guy called Felix Pink, whose job it is to dispatch people who are approaching the end of their natural life, and sort of ease their passing into the next life. And it is it's very, very funny, as you say. Belinda's always very witty in a dark way, and just the most lovable, unlikely protagonist I've ever come across. It's a superb book.
What a great name. Felix, what a fantastic name for a protagonist. Brilliant. Now, I'm keeping an eye on the time. I'm conscious that we are swiftly running out of time. So I'm going to ask my last question, and then we'll move on to audience questions. Now, being that we are in Wales, sort of, and the festival next year will be happening in Aberystwyth, I'd really like to know, now that we can travel a little bit more, is there anywhere in Wales that you're particularly keen to visit now that we can? Clare?
So I'm up in the north at the moment, and as I said earlier, I'm writing a novel that's set in North Wales, in a fictional part of North Wales with a lake through which runs the border between England and Wales. So there's a body that comes across the border in effect. So what I'm doing is spending a lot of time in and around North Wales, looking at different lakes. I've been up at Lake Vyrnwy, which is the most beautiful, beautiful place. I'm walking in the hills and just sort of getting a real sense of place as I'm writing. But I would also like to come down. I'd like to go to Tenby. I've never been to Tenby. And so many of my friends go on holiday there. So I think that might be on my list.
Yeah, it's beautiful. It's absolutely stunning. Bev, where are you most looking forward to visiting?
Well, I mean, anywhere, to be honest. I'm so grateful to be able to get out of the house finally and legally get out and about. Definitely don't go to Tenby, Clare. It looks lovely, but it's horrible. It's just, don't even bother. Nobody should take a staycation there. Stay away from it all. No, it's stunning. There's so many stunning parts of Wales. We are spoiled, but I've never been to the northwest bit, so we have optimistically booked a little cottage near Harlech, because I've never been to that part of the world, and I want to go to Harlech Castle because I love castles. I'm a proper old geek. My sister's probably watching, and she and I try to fit in a different castle every summer, at least in previous years. So we've not been to Harlech. So yeah, I'm going to go up there to that part of the world and support Marion, hopefully to have a little look at the Clough William Ellis's Italianate Folly. I did go years ago up there in the pouring rain on a bus trip when I was a kid with my mum, dad, and my aunt and some family cousins, and it rained so hard. All I remember is sitting under an umbrella in the pouring rain with a mist down, trying to eat a sausage roll, thinking, doing here. So I would like to go back and see it again in the sunshine and be able to appreciate it better.
Fantastic. Okay, so we have some questions from the audience. Alice has been feeding them to me as we've been chatting. Now, the first question that we have asks, what is the most surprising fact that you learned while writing your latest book? Should we start with you, Claire?
That on some airlines, most airlines, the pilot and co-pilot have to eat different food in case of food poisoning, so they will be served separate meals. This, in fact, has nothing to do with my book. It's not even in my book. I just didn't know that, and I thought it was an interesting fact.
Brilliant. And you, Bev?
You kind of caught me out a little bit now, because I'm trying to think of something that I didn't know. The new book, The Beach House, is set in Oregon, and my husband and I ended up going there because we're enormous fans of the 80s kids film The Goonies, where there's pirates in it and they go and look for a treasure. It's got loads of young actors that are quite famous now. And so I've mentioned this to numerous people, and the surprising fact is there are people that have not seen this film. I was saying this like everyone must know what this film is. If you haven't seen The Goonies and you want to see where the new book is set, and you want to see Cannon Beach and the amazing beach and scenery, there's no pirate ships in mine, but go and watch this film. It's like people that say they've never seen Star Wars. It's just like, what is going on? How can you not have seen? Oh, Amy's making a face. You haven't seen it.
No, I've not seen a single Star Wars.
And Claire, okay.
I haven't seen Star Wars.
Okay.
Have seen glimpses of the Goonies, and definitely not my type of thing. Haven't seen E.T. I'm afraid I'm just not up with all the classics. Not my thing.
E.T. is fantastic. I cry every time I watch it, even though I know what's coming. Okay, next question. This question is for you, Claire. And it asks, did you watch any plane-based hostage movies for inspiration, such as Passenger 57, United 93, and Non-Stop?
So I did watch, I watched United 93, but not until after I'd written the book. And I actually actively avoided watching anything like that before I wrote the book, because the premise of the book arrived in such a kind of complete form that I knew that this flight attendant would receive a particular sort of anonymous message, and then I knew kind of how that would play out. And I was slightly worried that I would absorb plot points and characterization, even lines and from someone else's book or film. So I just didn't. And then when I was in the kind of rewrites, not sort of editing stage, finessing things, I watched it then, and I was keen to see how they sort of handled it and built the tension. And locked room thrillers are really challenging because there's nowhere to go, and so you've got to use a very small place and a defined cast of characters. So I watched it then and enjoyed it lots about it. But otherwise, I've just done my own thing, and hopefully people will enjoy it.
Well, I know that I certainly did. And like I said at the beginning, I'm a terrible flyer anyway. I dread to think what I'm going to be like after reading this, trying to get on a plane. It's going to be an absolute task.
Do you know, I learned an interesting thing on Twitter the other day from a bookseller who said that books with aeroplanes on are the best sellers at airport bookshops. And I can't work out whether that's sort of a deliberate thing that travelers will seek out something that's about air travel, or whether it's just a kind of subconscious thing that's the mood they're in. But there you go, stick a plane on the cover, and it's a good thing apparently.
Interesting, so interesting. We have a question for you now, Bev, from Phil, who's asking, if you're visiting somewhere that happens to be particularly high up, does your husband ever stand in front of you?
I know why Phil is asking this question, because the book, in the book Wilderness, the unhappy couple end up visiting several very high locations, including in Yosemite, and they're up above the valleys. And there are instances in the book, obviously, with the will she, won't she, could she, would she want to pay her husband back for his infidelities with some sort of murderous impulse. But so I think, one, my husband didn't read the book until quite recently, and so we were okay for a bit. But yeah, no, I think he trusts me. It would be one of those scenarios, wouldn't it, of sort of plotting something in a book and then using it as, what was that film with Sharon Stone, Basic Instinct, years ago, where she writes a book about how she's going to murder someone, and then somebody gets murdered in that way, and she says, but I wouldn't be stupid enough to write it in a book. So I think you'd have to be pretty daft to you were going to kill somebody one way and then do it, unless you were very good at a double bluff. So thanks for that, Phil. But yeah, I think we're okay for a few more holidays.
And we have a comment, and it says, Bev, your books are so dark and addictive. And I suppose this question can go for both of you. Which authors have inspired you most? Claire?
So many authors all the time. They really do. I love to read across all genres, and so quite often I'm inspired by a literary writer or a comic writer. Kate Atkinson is a favorite author of mine, and but particularly because of the way she switches seamlessly between genre. But I've also been inspired by Sophie Hannah, who was a huge influence when I wrote I Let You Go, because her books were the only books that I'd come across at the time that married psychological suspense from the point of view of a female victim and also police procedure. And I knew I didn't want to write an out-and-out police procedure, but I couldn't quite get my head around how I could tell this story. And so actually her Culver Valley series was a huge influence in terms of me finding my voice and my place within the crime genre.
Brilliant. And what about you, Bev? What authors have inspired you most?
I think probably. Oh, am I still here? Can you see me?
Yes, you're with us.
Am I? Oh, okay. I had a little flashing. I think that when I was a teenager were the influence on me, and I was reading Barbara Vine in the 80s and 90s, and she sort of cornered that market on psychological thrillers before they were even before they were even trendy. There have been a couple. A Fatal Inversion is one. Gallow Glass was another one that were stunned me because they weren't about glamorous detectives and people out in the world doing these sort of great crimes and serial killers. They were about domestic situations.
We've lost you again.
Me.
Oh, are you with us?
Not to worry. I'll hang on here. Come back. Oh yeah. So Patricia Highsmith, of course, because I was reading her as a teenager, and I was just stunned by the nastiness of her characters, but also how much I sympathised with them. So I think if you're anyone that's read The Talented Mr. Ripley or even seen the film, the way your sympathy was something I just thought was really interesting. Can you sympathise with the killer? And I think most people will have read my book say my characters are not particularly likeable, but hopefully you still care about what happens to them, even if you kind of don't understand their motivations.
Fantastic. And I think we have time for one more question, which I did have in my list, but I moved on to audience questions because time was running out. And I love this question. I asked this of everybody. If you were stranded on a desert island and you could only take 3 books with you, what would those 3 books be and why? Should we start with you, Claire?
I hate this question. Okay, so these aren't favourite books necessarily. I would take Life After Life, which does happen to be a real favourite of mine, Kate Atkinson. Hang on, I'm going to choose from my TBR pile. I'm going to take Hamnet, which I bought recently, and everyone tells me is amazing, and I've not read it yet.
Fantastic.
And then I'm looking at the books I've been sent to read. I'm going to take with me Gillian McAllister's That Night, because I've loved all her other books, and so I'm sure I'd love this one too.
Brilliant, fantastic. And what about you, Bev? What will your 3 books be?
It is really hard, but I think if I'm going to go to Desert Island, I want 3 Desert Island doorstops. So I've got 3 real meaty ones. And I was thinking about it the other day, because it was asked on another panel, and I reckon probably The Count of Monte Cristo, just because it is such a fantastic, dark, layered adventure. Maybe Donna Tartt's The Secret History, because it was a book I read at 18 and kind of just as I was going off to college, and it blew me away. And every time you read it, you get something different from it. And the older you get, the more you hate those characters. But I think, and either something by Margaret Atwood, because even though everyone knows The Handmaid's Tale is fantastic, she's written many other fantastic psychological books. But maybe Sarah Waters' Fingersmith, which is a fantastic Victorian kind of mystery gothic. Oh, it's right on, yes, there.
Yeah.
And again, you can read it so many times, and you're still surprised when you spot things in there. So that it would keep me occupied long enough.
Fantastic. And I think, you know, we've come to the end of the hour. So I'd like to thank, you know, everybody that's watching for joining us tonight, and for your brilliant questions. Just to remind you that if you'd like to buy any of Clare or Bev's books, there will be a link in the YouTube stream to our partner bookshop, which is Bookish in Crickhowell. And finally, on behalf of Gŵyl Crime Cymru Festival Online, I'd love to thank my panel. Clare, Bev, thank you so much for joining me. And I'd like to wish you all a good night, and we hopefully we'll see you in Aberystwyth in 2022.
Definitely. Thanks so much, Amy.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you.